Do you believe me now? Kira asked, dropping 2 tears that resembled her husband. I couldn't be with you. I have Rachel, she's my family, Mark replied. Kira felt broken and realized she had made a mistake, and because of that mistake, completely innocent and unfamiliar people had almost suffered. Sitting on the damp ground, Kira cried, "Forgive me. I lost my husband almost a year ago. He disappeared. You look so much like him. Perhaps we could offer you a ride to our home," Rachel suggested, showing concern. "Something seems to be troubling you. Let's try to find a solution together." "All right, I'm not sure," Kira answered hesitantly. "It might be inconvenient for you." "Don't worry," Rachel reassured her. "Ethan and I are very interested in understanding how this is possible." The young Canadian woman looked at her husband, and he nodded in approval. "Let's head over. We have some tea, and I just baked some cookies for dinner. If my boys haven't devoured them all yet, you might be able to enjoy a couple of cookies." Rachel's smile was so warm and inviting that Kira's weary heart couldn't resist, and she agreed. When all 3 of them arrived at the Wells home, as Ethan and Rachel were known, Kira was struck by the size and coziness of their house. It resembled more of a sturdy country cottage than a modern and stylish building, but was remarkably comfortable and lovely. Photographs of the couple and their children adorned the walls, the fireplace mantel, and even the table, creating an atmosphere of family warmth. Here, Kira became entirely convinced that Ethan could not possibly be her missing husband, Mark. Mark had certainly gone on business trips, but managing the complex and detailed personal life she observed in Ethan was something Mark couldn't handle. Kira began to doubt that her husband's disappearance was due to some mysterious circumstances. Similarly, she couldn't accept her husband's disappearance as something inexplicable. Later, over a cup of tea, Ethan began to explain to Kira, "You see, I have a terribly poor memory, especially when it comes to my childhood. My parents never hid from me that I'm an adopted child. You grew up in an orphanage." Kira was surprised. "How is that possible? You don't remember anything from those years?" Ethan shook his head. "Unfortunately, I was too young back then. My parents never told me that the orphanage was in Russia. All I knew was that I was adopted, and that's it." Ethan looked at Kira with guilt in his eyes. "Of course, it hasn't shed light on the mystery of your husband's disappearance, but at the very least, it might offer hope that your Mark has a long-lost twin brother you didn't know about." "That is indeed strange," Kira said in English. "My husband always claimed that his parents were his biological parents. However, I have serious doubts about that. Unfortunately, they've already passed away." "My condolences," Rachel replied, and at that moment, Kira's phone unexpectedly rang. "Hello," the woman answered in the receiver. "Kira, this is Ivan, the investigator. I'm calling you," Ivan joyfully announced. "Hello, Ivan. What's going on?" Kira asked. "You just won't believe where I am right now, and you probably won't believe what we've just discovered," Ivan interrupted. Kira tensed. She wasn't sure if she was ready for more dreadful news, especially if it was related to Mark's death. "The note you handed me, remember? It had words written by your husband, a farewell." "Yes, I remember," Kira replied slowly. "So, we encountered some difficulties with handwriting analysis," the investigator announced. "We conducted a re-examination, and experts have determined that the note was written by a completely unfamiliar hand. This means, Kira, that your husband didn't write this note." It's as if a heavy sigh escaped at the other end of the line. "So, it means that the note might be a forgery. Is that what you're getting at, right?" The investigator continued. "At the moment, we don't know exactly who wrote this note, but we hope to find out soon. Kira, I'm afraid you'll have to prepare for the worst. It's possible that your husband was abducted for some purpose unrelated to ransom. Since you didn't receive any threatening calls, and it seems that Mark left voluntarily, it's more likely that he's no longer alive. I apologize for these heavy words, but considering how much time has passed since his disappearance, thank you, I understand," Kira replied calmly, though her soul was breaking apart at that moment. "Maybe I can help you in some way," Ethan cautiously asked. "By your words, it seems that you've been in contact with the police, even though you claim not to speak Russian." The woman smiled insincerely, focusing on Ethan. "Even if it's just a little, I have a friend who worked in the Altai forestry, came here for work a couple of years ago. Some of his stories stuck with me, including what he said about the police." Ethan gently touched her hand. "I suppose that if you share all the information with us, I can assist you. After all, I'm also eager to solve the mystery of whether my doppelganger is alive." As if unlocking her internal archive, Kira with a sense of melancholy told Ethan everything the investigator had informed her up to that point. Ethan thoughtfully nodded and expressed his thoughts. It's remarkable that an extensive search across the country yielded no results. Let me get in touch with my friend, the one who served time in Altai, and ask him to initiate his own investigation. Take on the examination of villages and settlements, interview the local residents. Maybe someone among them possesses some information. This is undoubtedly a more efficient approach than futile waiting. Kira, barely holding back tears, sincerely thanked Ethan for his assistance. Kira was in complete disarray, unsure of how to proceed in this situation. Rachel, sympathizing with her, offered to stay the night with them and provide support in retrieving her personal belongings from the hotel. Just stay here for a couple of days, relax. My husband will be handling your case right now, Rachel suggested, trying to reassure Kira. Kira politely thanked Rachel but firmly declined, saying, "You've already done so much for me," with a warm smile on her face. "I don't want to become even more of a burden to you. I'll return to the hotel but will leave you my contact information. If anything new comes up regarding Mark, I'll be immensely grateful to you." In the next few days, Kira tried to recover. She took walks through the city streets, breathed in the fresh air, and marveled at the beauty of Canada's nature. However, even the stunning scenery couldn't entirely dispel the sense of worry that had settled in her heart since the moment the investigator read her that mysterious note. Kira had almost lost hope and started packing her suitcase, preparing to return to her homeland. However, suddenly, Ethan burst into her room, bringing joyful news. "Don't give up, Kira. It's not over yet," he said with excitement. "My friend got the results of the inquiry, and, believe it or not, he found him." Kira could hardly believe her ears and asked slowly, "So, is it really Mark?" Ethan replied, "Well, we can't say for sure, but a man with the same distinctive features and a similar appearance is in a hospital in a remote village in Altai. And my friend, Fedor, said that this man is currently in a coma." The local doctor, a former neurosurgeon, decided to perform a complex operation at his own risk, but the important thing is that he's alive. Kira just couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Oh my God," she whispered to herself. "How did he end up in Altai? It's so far from the capital." Ethan couldn't contain himself and took Kira's hands. "Kira, listen, I'm ready to go to Russia with you," he offered. Kira met his skeptical gaze. "Don't worry about Rachel, I'm sure she'll understand. And perhaps, you're not entirely unfamiliar, you might be my brother's wife," Ethan said with conviction. "It's important for me to find out if Mark is truly my biological brother. Rachel has already let me go," Ethan proposed. "We can get tests done as soon as we arrive." "I doubt they conduct such tests in a rural hospital." Kira shook her head in disagreement. "Most likely, we'll have to wait for the results from the capital, but if we pay a double fee, they might expedite the process." Ethan nodded, and ultimately, Kira agreed to go home with him. The paperwork for Ethan took a few more days to process, and soon they boarded a private plane, embarking on a long journey to the Altai village where Kira might meet Mark. Throughout this time, Kira was incredibly anxious. Would the man in a coma be her Mark, or was she merely clinging to the last shreds of hope, risking that this hope might vanish like smoke and ashes? When they arrived at the hospital, they were greeted by Dr. Maria, a female surgeon who was taken aback by Kira and her companion's arrival. "Can I see this patient?" Kira asked and showed a picture of Mark. Dr. Maria carefully examined it for a few seconds and asked, "Did you just arrive?" "Honey, your husband is on his deathbed, and you've only just appeared. I just found out." Kira was stunned by these words and immediately rushed into Mark's room. Her heart was racing faster than usual. Mark was alive. Alive. She entered the room and stood still by his bedside. Her husband was there, his skin pallid, and he had lost a significant amount of weight, looking like he had lost about 15 kilograms. "Mark, my love," Kira whispered softly, slowly sitting on the edge of the bed and taking his hand. "It's so wonderful that you've been found." Dr. Maria looked at Ethan, who was still standing in the doorway, hesitating to enter. She quickly realized that Mark and Ethan were twin brothers, as such a resemblance was impossible to encounter in everyday life. None of the hospital staff or Maria's friends had any idea about her hidden feelings for the patient. She, stoic and silent, harbored a pure and, most likely, hopeless love for him. It was thanks to this love that she managed to secure a ventilator for him, thereby prolonging his life in a comatose state. That's why she was so deeply concerned upon hearing that possibly relatives of her beloved had been found, who would soon arrive to identify him. "But how did he end up here?" Kira asked in surprise when she came in a little later to check on the patient. Maria looked at her with sad eyes. "Local hunters found him in the forest," she explained. He was hanging from a tree, head down. Kira exclaimed in horror upon hearing this, and she instantly turned her gaze to Ethan, who remained in a similarly shocked state because the resemblance between Mark and this mysterious patient was uncanny. All signs pointed to them possibly being twins. There was no shortage of foul play here. Maria continued her narrative. If you could only see the state he was brought in. We literally spent 8 hours piecing him back together in neurosurgery. We miraculously managed to save his life, but the brain injuries were critical, and Mark fell into a coma. When or even if he will ever wake up is unknown. We lack the necessary equipment for a thorough assessment. If you want, you can try transferring him to a larger facility, but it comes with certain risks. How could something like this even happen? Ethan asked thoughtfully. I mean, who needed to get rid of him in such a terrible way? What could he have done, and for what reason? We don't even know. Maria shook her head in dismay. But if you want, you can have a blood test to check compatibility with your brother right now, the doctor offered. Ethan smiled. You also speak English quite well. He praised Maria. I used to work in St. Petersburg, the woman explained. I often had to communicate with foreign colleagues there, which is why my language skills are good. Why did you leave? Ethan inquired. Personal circumstances, the woman replied easily, and Ethan understood that it was best not to delve further into that topic. Kira asked the doctor to leave her alone with her husband and took Ethan with her to have his blood tested. And there they sat together beside her beloved, heavy-hearted, shedding tears. Kira gently stroked her husband's hand and said, God, thank you for saving you from the worst. Mark, you will recover, I know it. Can you hear me? You will recover. Over the next 2 weeks, Kira did not leave her husband's side for a moment. She talked to him, trying to elicit any kind of response. Meanwhile, Ethan had his tests done, and the results confirmed that Ethan and Mark were indeed identical twin brothers. Ethan even donated an additional portion of his blood, hoping that his healthy cells would help Mark recover faster. Kira, in turn, didn't miss a single opportunity to be by her husband's side, supporting him with her presence and conversations. Kira sat on a small and uncomfortable chair, exhausted, and suddenly her husband's eyelids began to slowly open. First his eyes, and then his lips slowly parted. Kira startled and gasped in surprise, immediately calling for the doctor. Once Mark received all the necessary medical attention, he gently squeezed his wife's hand, filled with care and love. I thought I'd never see you again, Mark said. And I thought the same. You can't imagine how many times I experienced an imaginary loss while you were away. A whole year, you understand, Kira exclaimed. Well, I suppose my company was in shock without me, Mark chuckled. Kira gave a soft smile. Our friend Dmitri took on a lot of responsibility. After all, he has been working in it since Vlad's time. He has incredible willpower and can solve any problems, remembering his former boss. Then her expression changed. Is something wrong? Are you feeling unwell? Kira asked with concern. Yeah, it's Dmitri, the real trickster, Mark said slowly. It's because of him that I'm here. What? Kira looked at him in surprise. She still hadn't told her husband about Ethan, preferring him to recover first. But she still wanted to know how Mark ended up so far from home with fractures and injuries. You're not mistaken, Mark confirmed. It was Dmitri who made me leave on the day you just departed. He called and said that our Chinese partners suddenly showed interest in a deal we'd been wanting to close for a long time. But they could only meet today, and it had to be in a city near the Russian-Chinese border, so I had to rush and leave. Mark clenched his hand slowly, a hand that had gone through hell because of his gullibility. I did everything he asked without even having time to call you, Kira said with a gentle reproach. Darling, I really tried, Mark murmured, looking into Kira's eyes with a remorseful expression. The phone was left in the car I parked right at the airport. By the time I boarded the plane, it had already started to take off. But wait, despite all the searches, the police never found your car, even though they combed the entire city. Right? Mark nodded. It seems that Dmitri and his people managed to move the car somewhere, so as not to attract any attention when I arrived. I was met by 2 huge bodyguards, real giants, each of them 2 meters tall. We could only reach the negotiation location in the village by helicopter. Expressing his frustration, Mark continued, they literally grabbed me and tossed me overboard like a sack of potatoes. I didn't even have time to exclaim, it all happened so quickly. I'm amazed I survived it all. Perhaps the tree branches slowed my fall a bit. Kira was in shock. The news she had just received had turned her perception of reality upside down. That sounds terrible, she whispered, feeling Mark gently stroke her cheek. So, in the end, all this mess was because of your deputy. Mark nodded and showed the tiny flash drive he held in his fingers. Yes, precisely because of him, he said. My people tracked him down and gathered evidence on him, recording everything on this small memory card. Dmitry defected to our competitors 5 years ago. It turns out he was a double agent, providing crucial information about the holding company in exchange for a significant sum of money. Most likely, he's the one behind all of this. He canceled my flight tickets and replaced all information about my whereabouts. It sounds incredible, but it seems to have really happened, Mark concluded. Kira was in shock, feeling her trust in the man she had believed in for so long crumble. She bitterly regretted not being able to see behind Dmitry's mask of frivolity and charm to his true face, an enemy and a traitor. I even considered firing him back then. Mark finished his story. This memory card was supposed to be our trump card. He could have left voluntarily, or we could have shown him the door at the police station in disgrace. But he turned out to be cunning. I think he had someone on our team who always kept him informed about my plans, even if I never told anyone about them. Mark alluded to someone, but Kira was too stunned to understand whom he was referring to. Do you have any suspicions about who this person might be? She asked. We'll discuss that later. Right now, I need to rest if you don't mind, Mark said, looking tired. Kira kissed her husband on the forehead and left the room. She headed to Ethan's room, their brother Mark, who was staying with a friendly elderly woman who had provided them with accommodation for the duration of their business trip. After telling Ethan the whole story, Kira felt stuck. Should they go to the police now or wait? If only Mark knows where that flash drive is, it might be better to wait, Ethan advised. The situation is extremely serious, and hasty decisions should be avoided. We need to weigh everything carefully. You're right, Kira agreed. But before we do anything, I'd like to introduce you. Ethan was pleasantly surprised by her suggestion, as he also wanted to meet his long-lost brother but didn't know how to approach the matter. Thus, Kira helped them prepare for the meeting. Mark was in complete shock when he saw his Canadian relative, who was his exact copy. Learning about the DNA test results, Mark was even more shocked. Ethan, I can't imagine how this could happen. My parents, all this time, how is this even possible? Ethan replied, for now, I'm just glad I found my brother. Besides Kira, I have no one else. Mark smiled and said, I'm happy to have met you, brother. When Mark felt better, the three of them returned to the capital. There, Mark first tracked down his stolen car, which had indeed been taken far away from prying eyes. Even the police couldn't find it. Mark extracted a miniature memory card and said with satisfaction, this is where you were. Later, Kira and Mark went to the police station, where they told the investigator, Ivan, the details of everything that had happened. Mark provided the flash drive as evidence. Ivan, the investigator, was excited and ready to start the investigation. This case promised to make headlines, especially after the official confirmation of the businessman's disappearance. Mark also held a press conference for journalists, where he assured that what had happened to him was a real crime and that all the guilty parties would be duly punished. While Mark was talking to journalists, security service personnel began to raid Dmitry's office and detained him. The elderly deputy initially tried to resist, pretending not to understand anything, but later confessed to all his actions during the interrogation. The motive behind his actions turned out to be envy and dissatisfaction. He believed that he deserved more than listening to and supporting Vlad, and then working 3 shifts so that the young man could have everything that, in his opinion, should have belonged to him. One of the most surprising aspects of this story was that the note in the office was left by Chris, the young secretary. It turned out that she was not only the author of the note but also skillfully took advantage of the moment to slip it into Kira's pocket without any hindrance. Chris explained during the interrogation that she had not even suspected that Dmitry would go to such radical actions. Her plan was for him to simply frame Mark and get him fired. Now, Mark's relatives were preparing for the legal proceedings and demanding justice, not only for those who attempted on Mark's life but also for those who expelled him from the helicopter. Mark himself started delving into his own past and Ethan's past, uncovering all hidden secrets and truths that could help them in this challenging journey. The truth turned out to be astonishing. Mark hired private detectives, and soon they unearthed that Mark himself was not the biological son of his parents. It turned out that Mark was Ethan's biological twin brother. Fate separated them when their parents died, and the director of the orphanage adopted Ethan, giving him a new name. Later, a couple from Canada adopted Mark. This explained why the brothers had never seen each other again. despite being able to continue communicating. Now, Mark and Eitan have reunited with their families. They visit each other for Christmas and celebrate the birthdays of Mark's nephews, Freddie, Johnny, and Vincent, together. Mark tenderly cares for his little relatives and adores his biological brother. Together, they have opened a family business producing office furniture in Ontario, and now Eitan is gradually learning the ins and outs of the family business from Mark. This incredible story has become the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, full of reunion and family harmony. Mark reevaluated many aspects of his life after everything that happened to him. He realized that the true value in his life lies not in money but in close people willing to support him even in the toughest moments when everything seems lost. Mark started spending more time with his wife, trying to restore the former passion and romance in their relationship. They even went on a second honeymoon to feel young and in love again, immersing themselves in a whirlwind of vivid passions. A month after returning from the honeymoon, Kira joyfully announced to her husband that she was pregnant. "Darling, I can't believe it finally happened," exclaimed Mark, holding his beloved wife in his arms. "And I never believed it would ever happen. But it seems we've gone through all the trials fate had for us," replied Kira, looking at her husband with tender love. "Mark, we've earned the right to become parents. Let's promise our future little one that we will always trust and support each other, and will never part again. No matter what awaits us, family is the most precious thing we have." "I promise, my dear," she said to Mark, and he responded to her with seriousness, gently kissing her. 9 months later, this lovely couple welcomed a wonderful girl named Alla into the world. Mark and Kira never cease to marvel and admire their daughter, believing that she will always have everything she dreams of in life. Kira became the perfect,